And to talk to us more about the crisis in Venezuela, we have with us economic analyst Joshua Jackson. Hello.
Hello.
Good afternoon. Hope you're doing well. Okay, let's jump straight in, okay? Now, the economy has collapsed since the oil prices dropped, okay? Why was Venezuela particularly hit so bad?
Well, yeah, other countries have suffered. Other countries have been very dependent on oil. But the issue in Venezuela is that there's been not very good economic and fiscal policy behind that. And so suddenly the oil price drop has exposed that. There's been populist policies, there's been price controls, exchange rate controls, and that suddenly, when the money has gone, basically because of a drop in oil price, it's been exposed in Venezuela. Other countries have been better able to adapt because they've got more diversified economies. They still have a private sector that still operates and is able to produce goods.
All right. Now, we noticed just on the package they had shortages of milk, sugar, even toilet paper, and those are basic needs. Now, why is it so poor there now? Is it really that bad?
It is. I was there in January and even struggled to find milk, and I was excited to find it in a supermarket and was restricted to only buy 4 litres of milk. And again, price controls is one of the major things. So that if the government controls and does control prices, it means that there's less incentive for farmers, for producers to produce things because they won't get a good price for it. So there's no profit to be made. And also the supermarkets and the shops, if they have to control the prices as well, it reduces their profit. So it reduces it as well. So it's a flow-on effect, and that means that there's less available. And the government's been importing cheap goods, which has made it more difficult for local producers. And when the oil prices come down, the revenues of the government have come down, and they can import less, and there's no backup within the domestic economy.
Right. Now, your wife is Venezuelan, and some of her family is still there.
That's right.
Now, in terms of the food queues, like we saw just now, how is it working? Is it rationed? Do people have to buy, or is the government giving it away, or what's going on?
There's a combination. They've tried to tackle this by more and more controls.
Okay.
So in fact, everyone's got an ID. And based on the last digit of your ID, that depends on the day that you can actually go and shop for certain items at certain stores.
Okay.
So they check on that?
They check on that.
Okay.
And if you're in the queue and you don't have the right number, you get out the queue. And also what people will do is they will go and buy those things, and then they'll sell them at a great profit on the black market.
Okay.
And so this is further contributing towards issues. My father-in-law actually just traveled 200 kilometers recently to go and buy food in another state because he heard there was food available. He traveled that distance to buy food for the family.
Right. Now, and there's also a lot of companies who pulled out of Venezuela, some who are manufacturing basic goods like Kimberly-Clark, and even Coca-Cola stopped productions. Now, that's also making it worse, right?
Yeah, it's much more difficult because I think those firms were holding out, were trying to keep producing food for the people of Venezuela. But then there are foreign exchange controls. And so they're dependent on the government for things, some of the inputs into their production to give them US dollars, to sell them US dollars. But the government was reducing that. So it meant that the supply of goods to produce those things in Venezuela was cut off. They didn't have dollars, and they eventually shut down their production.
You know, there's been a social unrest since the whole incident, right? And a lot of homicide has happened as well. Now, how is the safety there? Is it really dangerous?
I've lived in and been in very dangerous places. I've been in Baghdad, in Kabul, in Port Moresby, in Johannesburg, and I do feel least safe in Caracas. And it is unfortunate. There's a large supply of weapons and guns in the wrong hands. There are, apart from irregular criminals, there are people involved in drugs smuggling, in fuel smuggling, and other black market activities. And so, because of the economic situation, it's even more difficult. So I think once that turns around, then maybe we can see some improvements in that.
And we also saw that a lot of people have died during queuing, when they're queuing for food, right? And how's that going on right now?
Well, that continues, and so there is tensions that arise. And when we were shopping in January in Venezuela, it's under armed guard by soldiers to prevent rioting. But sometimes that does occur, and people sometimes do die.
Right. And now let's go back and take a look at the reasons why this is happening. Like you said, they have very bad economic policies. Now, some experts have said that it's the socialist policies made under Chavez previously that have caused this. I mean, can you give us your opinion on that?
Yes, so in the sense that actually, to be fair, under Chavez there was some really good moves in terms of he really tried to focus on the poor people. poverty declined, inequality declined, as measured by the Gini coefficient. There was also an improvement in the Human Development Index. But he was able to do that under a period of high oil prices, and so lots of money was coming in to Venezuela. But now you're in a situation where those policies, whilst they were good in the short, might have been okay in the short term, they're not sustainable in the long term. And you can't keep handing out things. And so when the money has stopped flowing due to the low oil price, it means that these policies are exposed and for what they are in terms of not sustainable and not in the best interests of the long-term health of the economy and the country.
Right. And is the current president, Nicolas Maduro, is him being in as president, is it making it worse? Can you blame him for?
I think he's partly to blame, but in the sense that he was handpicked by Chavez as his successor because he said, you're going to continue with the path that I'm on.
Right.
But in a sense you have to feel sorry a bit for Maduro because his becoming president has coincided with a drop in oil prices. So even if Chavez was still in power, you would probably be a very similar situation now. But he has seemed to have gone further in terms of price controls, distribution controls, political repression, and this has made it difficult and made it worse.
Now Maduro also, he appointed militaries as food ministers. Now what are your thoughts about that? Do you think it's a good idea? I mean, obviously they don't know a lot about foods, right?
Exactly. It's not appropriate. Effectively, the Minister of Defense has effectively been put in a position just below the president, which actually isn't anywhere in the Constitution.
Okay.
And so in terms of distribution, again, it's about the government keeps trying to find solutions by doing more government interference, when in fact, as government, they should be stepping back and facilitating the private sector. It works around the rest of the world. Let's step back and allow and encourage the private sector to do what it does best.
Right. Now, he's also been threatened to be stepped down with the referendum, and he's also blaming that the U.S. government is intervening and he's trying to take him down. I mean, what's your opinion?
Yeah, look, I'm an economist, not a political scientist.
Okay, sure.
But yes, I think unfortunately he was elected in a presidential election, so he's not standing down, and understandably so. But there is a process in the Constitution for a recall referendum, and they're actually. The government is making it very difficult for that to take place, for that democratic process to take place.
Right.
And yes, the government does say there is an economic war, that the private sector is against them, that the US and other outside parties are fighting a war against them, in inverted commas. And unfortunately, the real issue is the domestic policies that they're putting forward. It's not really what they think it is.
Now, some people in Venezuela are actually in support of him. Do you think Maduro is the right person?
Yeah, look, there is still a core of support for Maduro, the hardcore Chavez supporters that have continued to support Maduro. But that support is declining, and unfortunately he hasn't shown a willingness or a desire to change course. He's continuing down the path, and so one hopes that there could be a democratic change, for example, through the recall referendum, and the people of Venezuela can make a democratic choice to find another leader who could take them forward on the right path.
Okay, now oil prices are not returning back to normal. Now how is Venezuela going to turn things around at the moment, right now?
Well, there's a number of things. I was actually thinking there's a number, so there's exchange rate controls, removing those because there's a huge black market. There's price controls that can be removed to encourage people to start producing again. More political freedom, more freedom of the press. Stop printing so much money because there's high inflation, which makes it very difficult to do business. So these are some of the things that the government can do. Some of these need to be done overnight. Some of these need to be done over time. But very importantly, as part of that adjustment, it will be a bit painful in the short term. So need to find, for example, in Indonesia, ways of doing some cash transfers for a period of time to the poorest people in Venezuela, so that you can protect them and cushion them during that transition phase, and eventually it will get back up. And then you can pull that back and the economy will get on a good and sustainable path.
The state Venezuela is in right now, do you think it's possible actually for all that to happen?
Not with the current political leadership. Unfortunately, they're on a particular path, and so if there is, and hopefully there is democratic change, and then the right people get into power and make good decisions that are in the long-term best interests of the entire country, then that's possible. But right now, it's going to be very difficult.
Maybe just very quickly, can you compare this to the 1998 crisis in Indonesia?
Yeah, I mean, in the sense that the crisis in '98 was very dramatic, and the case is the same in Venezuela. That there was, in a sense, economic meltdown in Indonesia, and the same is happening in Venezuela. In terms of crisis and rioting, it's not at the same level.
It's worse in Venezuela.
Well, almost worse then, but I think there is the risk of the situation worsening in Venezuela. But there was a strong turnaround in Indonesia, and suddenly Indonesia's got back on the path, and one hopes that Venezuela can do that turnaround without it completely getting much worse.
Okay, Joshua, well, let's hope that things turn better in Venezuela.
That's great.
Well, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for your
Thank you very
time.
much for the opportunity.